Hi, it's Jerry Roberts. It is Sunday, August 23rd. We are back with another edition of Newsmakers, Journal of the Plague Year. And today we are talking with my old Calbuzz partner, political analyst, longtime California political writer, Phil Trounstine. Brother, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, Jer.
All right, we're going to talk about, we're right on the cusp here. We just ended a week of the Democratic National Convention, the first virtual convention in history. And we're going to, tomorrow, the Donald Trump extravaganza will begin. So we're going to talk about both of those conventions. Let me ask you first, what do you think Trump, who is he going to be appealing to? His base, suburban women, older voters, people who dislike both of them. Who do you think to the extent that any political consultants could get him to focus on a goal, what do you think it ought to be?
Well, the question of what do I think it ought to be or what do I think it's going to be, I think what it ought to be is to try to expand his numbers. But the problem is that after 3.5 years, Trump has shown he's either incapable or unwilling to try to expand his base. And so the only thing that he can do, the only thing he's capable of doing is to concentrate on his base. And that means that in order for that base to be big enough for him to win, he has to diminish the size of the vote that goes the other direction. So
so
the
not
math,
necessarily switch that vote.
no,
Just
suppress that. What he needs to do is make his portion, his vote, which is not going to change. You can't get any bigger. But right now, his vote compared to Biden's looks like this. So what he needs to do is reduce that number on this side so that his vote, which doesn't change, is bigger than what's on the other side. And
so
the only way he
reduce the universe of voters,
right,
and make his base a larger portion of that.
and the only way he can do that, in my view, is to go ultra negative on everything that Biden stands for and everything the Democrats stand for. He has to try to reduce. Biden got something like a 3 to 5% bounce in terms of his favorability out of this convention. The numbers didn't move that much; they never do. But his favorability went up 3 to 5%. And so what they want to do is they want to take that away, and then they want to reduce it, and then they want to further reduce the total number of people that are involved in this election, the total universe, so that their 35 to 40% of the vote becomes a larger proportion. So that dictates 4 days of ultra negativity against the other side. There is no addition here. There's no way to build it bigger. Trump's demonstrated he can't do that, or isn't willing to do that.
Yeah, no, I think, of all the criticisms of Trump, narcissist, criminal, corrupt, inept, and so on. I think the worst thing is he's the first person in history who really has never made an effort or even extended the rhetoric of unifying the country, that he's the president of all the people. And that was interesting because that was one of the themes that Joe Biden really hammered in his acceptance speech. I'm going to be the American president, and even if you didn't vote for me.
Well, I think the Democrats, the roll call of the states was so fabulous because here they went from state to state to state, showing the diversity of the country, the diversity of the human beings involved, and it was
the diversity
riveting.
the diversity of the calamari. Let's be frank.
Exactly, it was riveting. Yeah, I thought like a lot of other people. I thought, okay, they're getting to the roll call. I can get up and go get dinner now. But you couldn't walk away. You couldn't walk away from
Debbie torturing the dog again.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But you couldn't walk away from that thing because every state was interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
And he doesn't have every state, obviously.
no, he not only doesn't have every state. What's the diversity? The diversity is: are we going to see Tiffany Trump, or are we going to see Eric Trump? You know,
All of the
how,
above, I think. All of the above. All right, let me ask you this. There's been a lot of discussion in the universe of punditry and blowhards about the parallels between this and the 1988 convention and election. And you and I were both there. Michael Dukakis came out of Atlanta, the Democratic nominee, with a big bump. I think he had 17 points or something. George Bush went into his convention in New Orleans. You know, a lot of people were saying he was finished, but he was able to A, bring Willie Horton out of that, and B, make the election about a lot of cultural issues, the Pledge of Allegiance and other things of that category, and basically turned it into a referendum, or at least a choice election on Michael Dukakis. So he went in, it was kind of a referendum on George Bush. People didn't feel good. George H.W. Bush, people didn't feel that great about him, but he came out, it really made it a choice. So is Trump in a position to be able to duplicate that and to make that dynamic happen again?
well, I think they can try, and I think it's not a bad comparison to try to make. But let's think about it for a second. Nobody knew who Michael Dukakis was before that race began, except for people of Massachusetts and a few surrounding states. Joe Biden's been in the national consciousness for some 45 years. People know who Joe Biden is. They've seen him, and he was vice president under the most popular and accomplished president that most of us have seen in our lifetime. So I think it's a very hard, it's a tough lift. The comparison breaks down in that Michael Dukakis was to some degree a blank canvas. And as you and I have seen, it's been very hard for Trump to portray Biden as anything other than who he is. And they go after Hunter Biden. They go after Kamala. But what do they got on Biden? They try to say, well, the whole attempt to try to say he's a doddering fool kind of fell apart when you watched his speech.
Well, let's talk about the Kamala piece of it then.
Yeah.
I mean, the other argument that they've made is that, you know, and Biden said as much. I mean, he's a transitional president. So
right.
They've made this argument that he's basically a vessel for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And certainly there was a lot of profile for that wing of the party, except for the Latino part, which we can talk about too. And then, you know, Kamala is still, in a sense, an empty slate. And a lot of the things, you know, you saw them go after her a little bit this week about a case when she was the DA in San Francisco, when there was an immigrant who was here illegally who committed a terrible crime. There's other stuff to do that on, or particular cases, you know, of the Willie Horton stuff. So can they do a bank shot of going after Biden by going after her and really ripping her down?
I think they're going to try. I think that's exactly what they're going to try to do, because I think she's to some degree a blank slate, and she does have some vulnerabilities. I mean, she didn't pursue the death penalty for a cop killer in San Francisco. You know, that's your Willie Horton moment. So far, they haven't been able to decide whether they want to go after her from the right or from the left. Sometimes they go after her from the left. Sometimes they go after her from the right. I think the most productive way they can go after her is probably from the right, because that's where they have a chance of picking up some support. But here's a question: is anybody going to be persuaded to vote against Joe Biden because of what is said about Kamala Harris, who's not already against Joe Biden? Follow me? Is there anything that they can dredge up about Kamala that would actually move a voter?
Well, let's talk about it because, I think one of the things that kind of surprised me about the Democratic convention is that they had a lot of high profile speakers that looked like you and me. John Kasich, Mike Bloomberg, what's his name? The historian John Meacham, for God's sake, got 4 minutes. I mean, Julian Castro was nowhere to be seen, but we're listening to John Meacham drone on. So, I think they were really aiming for a little bit of that center-right, moderate Republican, former, California coastal Republican type of person, on the theory that if they can just peel away, I don't know, 5% of the Republican vote from Trump, then they win, as opposed to, really trying to gin up turnout more among younger voters and voters of color. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I really thought there was a lot of emphasis on sort of white, middle-aged, and older, particularly male voters. Was that a smart thing to do?
Well, first of all, I agree with you. They had those people involved, but I think if you look at the total number of hours on the screen, that I bet it was 80% little people of color, unknown human beings, who just had stories to tell. The conductor from the Amtrak, the kid from New Hampshire with the stutter, young Latina whose family got torn apart. I think that I bet you it was 4-1 average folks versus sort of the crossover white male, white suburban voter. And I think so. I thought the proportions were pretty good, and I think that there is a chance that they could get some of those people, those Lincoln Project Republicans, people who have a certain set of principles about open markets and things that that made them sort of Rockefeller Republicans, Ken Maddy Republicans, people that we in California know as sort of, as you said, coastal Republicans. If they could, they're Republicans, but if they can see the ocean anywhere from their home, they vote as like an environmentalist. There's probably a lot of them down around where you live. Probably a lot of those folks in Montecito and Santa Barbara who are Republicans fundamentally, but they can't stand Donald Trump.
Yeah. So let me back up just a little bit to that 1988 thing, because that New York Times piece that I mentioned that Adam Nagorny, our friend Adam Nagorny, wrote about the parallels. The kicker was from Susan Estrich, who was Michael Dukakis's campaign manager, and she said, Trump's tried a lot of things. He hasn't found his Willie Horton yet, but he's still looking. I'm wondering, one thing I noticed that was sort of small, maybe not that small difference between Biden's commentary and Kamala's. She said Black Lives Matter. She said there was systemic racism. He didn't say that. One of the comments was, we got to get rid of the bad cops, but there's a lot of good cops, which is sort of the bad apple, which is really at odds with Black Lives Matter. Do you think that they're going to go after the Republicans, Trump and the Republicans, Black Lives Matter, and more specifically, George Floyd? I mean, he's become this iconic figure, but he had a long criminal record. He had, he did crimes against women. He was not an angel by any means. Do you think there's any room for them to push back there?
Yeah, sure, I do. I think that there's room to push back there. Again, and I think that may well turn out to be their Willie Horton move. But again, so on the flip side of that, the question is, will Kamala Harris increase by 4 or 5% the turnout in Milwaukee, Detroit, and Philadelphia? Because if she does, if she's able to get black people to the polls in just in those 3 cities alone, that would make a difference in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And that's all you and I know that Biden needs. So the question is there enough there? Can you George Floyd, can you suppress the vote with George Floyd, or turn the tide in some places with an attack on George Floyd? I think that may be the kind of thing they do, but again, it's this question of reducing the vote, not expanding the vote.
So
do you let me ask you this. Do you think that attacking George Floyd gets any voters to move in favor of Donald Trump?
I think attacking George Floyd, combining with a lot of footage about the riot in Portland, which is just the goofiest situation, and elsewhere, the guy they dragged out of the car or went to his house, and a lot of that stuff, I think that's aimed squarely at white suburban women who might be on the cusp. And as you know, white women went for Trump last time, according to the exit polls, +5. So I think that's where that's aimed at. I don't know if it's going to work, if it's not going to work.
My question, wait a minute, just to come back to my question. My question is, I could see how it might suppress votes.
Yes.
Do you think it moves anybody to Trump?
Not much. Not much.
Yeah. So if it's effective, it would be effective in reducing enthusiasm for the Democratic side.
Yeah, Joe Biden's going to let this kind of stuff, hang out. Which is that's the argument that Trump is caught in. He shows all of these visuals of rioting and fires and stuff like that, and this is Joe Biden's America. Well, no, it's actually Trump's America because it's happening right now. So he's got a record that he's got to defend. So 175,000 people have died from the coronavirus. We've got huge unemployment. We've got, race, anti-racism protests, race is on the table in a way it's not been. So how does he just pretend that none of that is happening? How does he push back on that? Does he say, well, they said 2 million people were going to die of the pandemic and only 175, done a great job. How does he deal with his record?
I don't know, because like you say, 176,000 dead from COVID, 10% unemployment, 7.8 million jobs lost, an economic growth rate that's -5%, 2.1 million people have lost health insurance. That's Trump's record. And so I think what they have to do is try to ignore that. They just say, look away, it
is what it is.
Well, it's the old Dixie, refrain. Look away, look away. And don't pay attention. Don't pay attention to that stuff. Pay attention to what I'm telling you about. But Jerry, what's interesting to me about that is, think about this: the dynamic of a challenger. Remember, Biden is the challenger, theoretically, of an incumbent president. And the dynamic is normally that the challenger has to A, make the case for himself, has to make the case against the incumbent, and then B, make the case for himself, right? Trump makes the case against himself with his own record. All Biden has to do is show that he's the alternative. In other words, the dynamic of this race, and I think Biden did this with his speech, has been flipped on its head. Biden looks like the incumbent, and Trump looks like the challenger. Just like you said, that's his record. This is his.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like 1980. when we had huge inflation, unemployment, hostages taken in Iran. And what Ronald Reagan needed to do was to step up and make himself, acceptable
Right.
to get past. And he did that really in the debates as much as he did it in his convention. Here's where I think the Democrats left an opening with their convention. And in a lot of ways, I felt like their convention was kind of a replica of Hillary Clinton's 4 years ago, in that, they said, we're diverse. Trump has bad character and is a terrible person, and we have an all-American hero. They didn't talk enough, I think, about sort of middle-class economic issues. Here's what I'm going to do for you. There was a lot about healthcare, I think, which was very important. But, I heard a lot more about, Joe's being resilient and Joe's tragedies and, all that kind of stuff. I didn't hear, here's what I'm going to do specifically to rebuild the economy. So don't you think Trump's going to make the argument, hey, and he claims the Obama economy for his own, whatever, I did it once, I did it again. And that's the one area in all the polling where Trump is ahead of Biden, is in managing the economy. Do you think that the Democrats made a mistake by not emphasizing that more?
I think they could have emphasized it more. I think, but if you recall, there were a lot of blue collar guys that stepped up to the plate in that thing, time after time.
Union guys.
Union guys. Yeah, a lot of IBEW and auto workers and stuff like that. I agree with you that one of the big things that Biden should say is he saved GM and he killed bin Laden. Those two things together. I mean, that's what Obama did. He could say we. He could say we saved GM, we killed bin Laden. There's a hammer at home, because they did. It's a fact. And
yeah, and they had the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, making that point. That point was made. And I think if you look at the polling of those three states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan is really, really leaning Biden.
Yeah.
I mean, much more.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in pretty good shape in Michigan. It's
right. I think he's about 9 points in Michigan. He's about 6 to 8 points in Pennsylvania, and he's only 4 to 6 points in Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin's the weak link there.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Dems again just a little bit.
Okay.
Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, Jill Biden, and Kamala Harris were the big 5 speeches. How would you rank those 5? Who was the best?
Well, I think Michelle was the best of all of them. I think she knocked it out of the park. She's so personable and yet so profound. In terms of history, Barack Obama's speech will be, I think, something for the ages, because, it was the first time we've ever seen an incumbent president make the argument that what's on the ballot is not just an alternative candidate. What's on the ballot is American democracy. And he made that argument magnificently and profoundly. And so historically, I think that'll be the most important. But in terms of just connecting with people, if you had to give them a 1 to 10 rating, I think you got to give Michelle a 10. And I thought Biden's speech, for all the rap on him as sort of incapable of making a connection, I thought he really did a terrific job.
Yeah, as a practical matter, that was the most important.
Right. That was the most important.
I mean, the whole thing went on for 4 nights, but it was the last half hour that really, was he going to get up there and drool and trip and,
right. And here's interesting, Jerry. What he did he quoted from Seamus O'Haney, the Irish poet, and by quoting the power of what he had to say, that hope and destiny,
are in harmony.
hope and history become one. But by quoting him, it didn't lose any of its power, nor would it have 1987 when he quoted Bobby Kennedy if he had just quoted Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah.
But in this case, he attributed where the idea came
Well,
from.
what's
astonishing? It didn't lose its power.
You broke that story out of the California Democratic Convention. That was your story. My story was how much Biden looked like Peter Uberoth. So that kind of tells you what our approach was to politics. But the fact that qualified as a scandal at the time and was enough to drive the guy out of a race, and now we look at where we are, it's just, oh God. All right, let's talk about Kamala, because I thought Kamala got, all these headlines and historic this, and yes, she was the first woman of color to do that. But, to be on a national ticket, that's no small thing. But I thought her speech read like it was drained through a sock. I mean, it was obviously done by committee, and she was so obviously, trying to put on a big smile. I mean, she smiled more in that 20 minutes than I've seen her smile since 2000, in the last 20 years. It was so obviously fake to me or at least, self-conscious that she was doing that. What do you think of her speech?
Well, it's hard for folks like you and me who have watched Kamala for many, many years and have a sense of who she is once she's in office and out of the limelight, because we've watched her equivocate and fail to take strong positions. And I think, as we said on Calbuzz, that she has positions, not convictions.
That was your line, and that's exactly. Yeah. That's exactly. Right.
And I think and you pointed out that after watching her for 25 years, it's hard to know whether or not there's a core of beliefs there. And yet, if you stand apart and look at what she did, she was warmer and more direct than you and I know. But from the average viewer's point of view, I think she came across really well. And I think that's what they're banking on. They're banking on people who don't have any knowledge of her background, seeing what she's like for the first time or second time, coming to her with fresh eyes. She came across, she got that mamala stuff out there. She had people who know her on a personal level say she's really funny and enjoyable, and I think she came across to some degree as a warm human being. But I think that that's not going to be her main role in this campaign. It's going to be to look like a badass prosecutor.
Well, that's what she needs to. Yeah.
And I think that's what they'll do. But I think they need to.
And because of her record, because she does take positions and not principles, there's stuff to attack her on either side. So, she also, at the same time, she didn't pursue the death penalty for the cop killer. The one guy from San Francisco who's on death row, who there's a lot of, circumstances about his conviction and stuff. She was deaf to the appeals to revoke that sentence, which the current district attorney of San Francisco just did. She said it was impossible, couldn't be done. So maybe that's a strength that, she.
I know it's hard to say. We had those two death penalty, two measures on the California ballot that would have eliminated the death penalty in California altogether, and she wouldn't take a stand on it.
Let me. We're almost out of time, but let me ask you this: so Trump, of course, historically, the one party has sort of gone dark when the other party's having its convention. That's all out the window, obviously. And not only that, the nominee is always traditionally waited till the last night to speak.
Trump's going to
He's
speak
going to talk
all four
nights.
four.
He's going to talk all 4 nights. So if you're Biden, you're looking at that. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's probably a good thing. I mean, that's my take anyway. I don't know what you think, but I think Trump has done nothing to expand his coalition in 3.5 years. I don't see how there's anything that he can do in 4 nights to expand his coalition. I think it's going to be very, very, very negative. So I think the campaign has to be ready with rapid response to point out to reporters and TV people what the truth is when charges are made. But I'm not sure Biden has to do much. Do you think he does? Don't you think Trump kind of digs himself a hole?
I think again, going back to the flawed 1988 parallel, Dukakis did not. He did not. They did not respond. They waited till October to respond. I don't think Biden will make that mistake. I think they will have counter programming as well.
Right.
But the thing that, there's always Fox News, and that's where his base is, and that's what people are going to be watching. And so to the extent that there is a propaganda channel of the United States government, that's it. It's out there. They're not questioning anything that he said,
right,
or fact checking, or, well, maybe, Chris Wallace, maybe a little bit of Brett Baer.
Right.
But, that's going to be hammering that home. And that's, again, his base. So maybe he can find, some people who didn't vote last time who go along with him.
It's really hard. Don't you think that's a tough? I mean,
it's very tough. I'd rather be in Biden's position than Trump's position. But, we haven't even talked about the fact that after the election, no matter what happens on November 3rd, he's got 77 days when he's the president, when he can screw around, and who knows what he's going to do if he needs to steal the election. And obviously,
I think, I think the biggest concern that we have going forward is whether or not there's an actual election in 50 states, and whether or not we can actually get ballots counted by the people. Because I think if it's a fair election, Biden will crush him. Will crush Trump, but I don't see a fair election coming. Do you?
No. I mean, no matter what happens, Trump is going to declare victory on election night. He's going to say he won. So I think, the next level of thing is then what's really going to be crucial is those Senate races. Because if there are 4 Senate races, say, Colorado, Arizona, North Carolina, Maine, maybe Montana, places where it's clear that the Democrats have unseated Republican incumbents in the Senate, then that's going to make it extremely difficult for Trump to say that he's won if there's a national legislative vote against him as well. So.
Yeah, and he doesn't have a cushion. He doesn't have a congressional cushion of any sort to fall back into.
And that it's clear it's a wave election.
Mm-hmm.
If that much is clear. And I think it's very interesting that Mitch McConnell is not attending the Republican convention. He said he has conflicting travel plans.
I think he's washing his hair that night.
Well, when was the last time that happened? Our guy, Kevin McCarthy, the great Bakersfield Republican guy who you and I knew from Sacramento.
Yeah.
The ultimate transactional politician. He'll be there.
Sure.
Leader. He'll be there. But Mitch McConnell.
He represents the far end of the spectrum that from Eric, from Ivanka Trump to all the way to Kevin McCarthy. I mean, that's how wide a coalition they've got there.
But Mitch ain't going, so we'll take that for whatever you will. All right, brother. I'll check back with you next week.
Okay.
We'll see how things go.
It's going to be fascinating to watch. It really is going to be something.
And as we always say at Calbuzz, I know there's so many of our friends in California who will not be able to stomach watching this.
Right.
Republican thing, but we watch this stuff so you don't have to.
You don't have to.
All right, man. I'll see you later. Thanks.
All right, brother. Thanks. Bye.
Uh,